Welcome to the Say It Skillfully Podcast, where I, Molly Tschang, talk with leaders, CEOs, entrepreneurs, elite athletes, artists, and professionals like you who open up about what's been hard, defining moments and learnings and finding their true north and succeeding on their terms. The podcast took a little break for a few months. We're back with a video version. Today, I am delighted to be joined by my special guest, who hails from Sydney, Australia. Came to the US to join the WD-40 company, and who knew that he'd be with this publicly traded enterprise for over 35 years, rising to CEO and chairman of the board before passing the reins in August 2022. Over his 25-year tenure as CEO, he built a purpose-driven company with a compelling culture that most of the Fortune 500 would envy, achieving a 15% compound annual growth and growing from a $300 million market cap to a $3 billion market cap. Without further ado, a warm welcome back to my friend, inspiring leader, and even more extraordinary human being, Garry Ridge.
Oh, g'day, Molly. It's so wonderful to be with you today. Thank you. And when you were talking about all these different people you have on your show, I was going through the list mentally. I thought, I don't fit into any of those.
You fit into it because you are authentically you, Garry. And ever since I met you, I remember the first time on stage telling your WD-40, and I just wanted to bottle you up with all that you were saying. And so, folks listening, this is what Garry and I talked before the show started. It can look like these people like Garry just sail through. It's all fabulous. And, there are times where it really is a struggle to figure out who we are. And sometimes you find things out about yourself that you don't really love. And there's some things you can improve on and some things you can't. And, being at one with that and showing self-compassion. So, Garry, I'm just really grateful for how authentic you are as who you are and being a real role model for all of us.
Well, I'm a work in progress. Don't worry about that.
I appreciate that. So I have to laugh. I took stock of many of your roles, right? So professionally, CEO, chairman, coach, author, adjunct professor, board member, personally treasured friend, nurturing family man. So, you raise your son and daughter with your lovely wife, 3 awesome grandkids, and you have a lot of roles. So I just want to ask you, is there one role you most identify with right now?
Yeah, I think right now in this season of my life, I reflect on my new purpose statement that I developed once I refired, which was, I help leaders build cultures of belonging where love, forgiveness, and learning inspire happier, more connected world. And I think that's so important now. So, I think I was lucky enough to do this 25-year apprenticeship in leadership to be able to put it to work now. So I think this is the most important season of my life.
Yeah, it's so exciting. I love the refirement. I mean, it's just so fabulous and so much you have to offer for us. And it's interesting because I just have noticed how on fire you really are. And not that you weren't before, but most people wouldn't think that, right? Having passed the baton, and you did. So we're going to get to the refirement because that's very exciting. But I would really be remiss if listeners didn't get a chance to hear you talk about you, which I know you don't typically do. But is where you are now what you imagined growing up, down under?
Never, ever, 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 ever. I grew up in Sydney, Australia. I was the youngest of a family of 4. There was actually 12 years difference between me and my next sibling, my brother. So I grew up in a family of adults, basically. My dad worked for the same company for 50 years, from when he was 15 to 65. So I learned a lot about work ethic for him. I started, doing odd jobs from the age of 5 or 6. I worked on a milk truck. I sold newspapers. I washed cars. I delivered pharmacy for a chemist shop or a pharmacy. And interestingly enough, they have a thing in Australia called, it was called something guidance. I can't remember, the vocational guidance. And you do a test. And I did this vocational guidance test in high school. And they came back and said, well, your aptitudes, this, I think you'd be a good telecom linesman, which means I would work climbing poles, putting telephone lines up. And I thought, I don't like heights. I don't know how I got there. So, if you would have said to me, even in my 20s, that one day I'd be sitting in San Diego after completing a 25-year experience as a CEO of a US public company, I'd say, Molly, you've been smoking unfiltered cigarettes. That's never going to happen.
So talk about the family dynamic. I mean, as a kid, you strike me as you are a fun-loving person, and Aussies kind of have that reputation. They're very light or what have you.
Yeah, I the family, I grew up with adults. My life was around more of my younger nephews and nieces than it was around my brothers and sisters. Although I was very close to my closest brother, who unfortunately passed away with cancer a number of years ago. And he nurtured me and my sister. I was very close to my next, and I still am. My sister's in her 80s now, and we talk either by text or other ways nearly every day. Um, but I grew up in this atmosphere. My mum, who lived till she was 99 years and 9 months old, was really the one who, would often say, stand up, hold your head high, you can do anything. She was born in 1914, and when you think about it, she went through World War One, World War Two, the Depression, all those things. So, thinking of reflecting on her during Mother's Day, which was just recently, it's like, wow, wouldn't I love to have another conversation with her? And I so miss my cups of tea with her because that was it. So I just grew up in this environment where, you were expected. It was a middle class family living in a suburb of Sydney, and it was just what it was. I don't know if you probably don't know this. I think you do. I used to be a radio disc jockey in Australia. My brother and I did a Sunday morning magazine radio show in Sydney. And it was 2CCR FM, Over the Hills with Garry and Leslie Ridge on a Sunday morning. So that was one of the things I enjoyed doing a lot and missed when I left to come to the US. And of course now my brother's passed, but I still have fond memories of that.
So that is it. So were you very outgoing as a youngster?
Um, I'm an introvert. You wouldn't know that because when you've seen me speak on stage or whatever, but I think I'm an extrovert in that I want to enjoy the presence of people, but I don't enjoy huge parties with people I don't know. And, that drives me crazy. But I really do like being amongst people where I could learn something and really hear what they're about.
Yeah, I appreciate you bringing this up because, and so I'll define this for the Molly way. Like introvert is, I derive my energy from within versus deriving energy externally, which is not an index of sociability, right? And so people are like, you can't be an introvert. I'm like, watch me. And so like same thing, you can work a room, I could work a room, and I get home and it takes a lot out of me. And I need to kind of decompress. Whereas I have my darling sister, she comes back and she's like, let's go out and do it again. And I'm like, no, let's stay in. Right. And
I
so,
hear you. I
yeah.
hear, when I speak at events at the end of my time on stage, I am exhausted. I mean, I am really mentally exhausted.
Yeah.
And our dear friend Marshall Goldsmith, he has a mantra that he does before he goes on to speak, and I stole it just to get myself ready. And here it is: "There's no business like show business. There's no business I know." And it's really, I have to get myself ready because I love sharing what I share
Mhm.
because it's all my scar tissue, and I love sharing what I share. But it takes energy to do that, and it is exhausting.
Yeah, I appreciate you bringing that up. And the one shout out for listeners is just it's important to know what you need and to
Mhm.
be able to, get that for yourself because otherwise it can be really draining. We do have to give a shout out to dear Marshall because we love Marshall for our crossing paths and for the countless things that we have learned from him as a
Absolutely.
wonder coach for sure. So Australia is far away from a lot of the other continents. So how is it Did you have this worldview of knowing that there was stuff outside of Sydney, out of Australia as a kid? I'm curious, what was I mean, I had no global worldview when I was little. Although I take that back. We traveled a lot. I take it back. We did travel a lot, so I knew there was a lot of places to visit.
I was always curious, and my mum, was always encouraging me to get out and understand the world. And remember, in Australia, if you ever go from Australia somewhere, you don't go for a weekend because we're a long way away from anywhere. But I was fortunate enough, before I joined WD-40, I worked for a company called Hawker Pacific, which is it's owned by Hawker Siddeley Group in the UK. And Hawker Pacific were the licensee for WD-40. And when I joined them, it gave me exposure to the Asian market. So I started to travel up into, China. And in those early days, the only way to get into China was from Canton, into Canton from Kowloon on a train. But it was just intriguing about, wow, look at all these different people and the cultures and what does that stand for? And that's pretty exciting. And it was, I think I earned my notoriety at WD-40 because I'd come to the US for sales meetings because of my relationship with the licensee. And we were traveling back from Tijuana in a bus after being to a sales meetings dinner. And for some reason, I thought it would be a good idea to sing Tie Me Kangaroo Down Sport on the bus. And actually the chairman and the president of the company were on that bus. And I thought, well, that's the end of my opportunities now that I've done that. But apparently they must have liked, I wasn't a good singer, but they apparently liked the song. And so it's kind of stuff like that, it's interesting. And but I did really appreciate the differences of cultures around the world. When I was leading our international business, I used to say to my international team, when we go into a country, we put in a disc. And when we leave that country, we need to take that disc out because the next country, even though it may look similar, there are going to be cultural differences that we need to be aware of. Mm. And we'd always spend a couple of days in the streets, walking the streets, looking at sitting in a park, watching people do their people thing to try and understand what was the true essence of the culture, because we needed to understand the people.
So fascinating. That's so early on. You were onto that. I can't tell you the number of places I've landed to do the business meeting. I did not really experience whatever that place is, and really to my loss. And for you to be a young person, was that just sort of natural, like you need to do that? Because I think that others might go in and be very task focused.
Well, I was curious, as I said, but I watched other businessmen fly in, meet at the Hilton Hotel, and fly out. And it's like, well, what do you know about the culture or the people or the customers that you're trying to serve if you just do that? And not only that, I found that being able to share with those that I'd met a little bit about how I'd tried to understand their culture, and that gained their respect and trust early. It's like, wow, you were down in, the hardware market of, Beijing yesterday? Yeah, I was. And this is what I saw. And they go, wow, I always say we need to get our shoes dirty. To be great business people, we need to get our shoes dirty.
I love that. So do you remember any particular this kind of epiphanies? Because when you are traveling, like a wow moment, whether it's a food or just a custom that different people have, because I think that's, when you go away, it really does help you appreciate what you had before, but just your eyes just get like this. I'm just wondering if you had any moments of remembering.
Oh, how many days do you have? Well, I'll give you one, and it's really interesting. When I traveling to China or into Asia, when I was at home in Australia, my mum used to always say, finish everything on your plate, Garry, right? So eat all your dinner. Well, what that says when you're in Asia is you're still hungry. So, I'd be sitting there eating Chinese or whatever food, and next thing they bring more. And it's like, well, I better eat it. Next thing there's more. And, it's like, oh, I then came to realize that it's the right thing to do is to leave some, because that means you're now content and you've eaten what you should have eaten. And that's just one of the things you learn. It's like when you go to in Japan and some of the Asian countries, people, when they acknowledge you, they're not necessarily agreeing with you. And that took me a lot to learn too. I'd be in Japan and people would be nodding their head, and I'd walk away and say, oh yeah, I think we've got that clear. And oh, they were just acknowledging you. They weren't agreeing with you. It's like, oh, okay. So, understand those little nuances is so important.
Yeah. So on the food thing, I have to laugh because I remember being 7 years old and friends would come over and my mother would put my friend next to her. And then they were, you're a kid. So I would lean over, "Psst, if you keep eating it, she's going to keep giving it to you." So I was like, it's okay not to eat it all. And then I remember being in college, my mom would call, what have you eaten today? And I was like, what? Is she obsessed about what I'm eating? And my sister's the same thing. We realized that's in their, that's what they say, like how are you?
Yeah, exactly. You know,
That,
it's again, it's if you think about the Latin culture, it's about building relationships first. And so many business people, the worst thing you could ever do is send the salesman who sells to Walmart in Bentonville to the Mexican office of Walmart and think that it's the same experience. It's absolutely not. If you go to Bentonville, you got 15 minutes in a cubicle, in, out, get out. It's a very direct culture. You
yeah.
go to Mexico and there's a big waiting room and everybody's sitting around waiting because you have to build the relationship and have that conversation before you even get into the discussion about what the business is about. So again, do we understand and do we respect the cultures of the places that we're doing businesses and the people we're dealing with, which I think is, so important. It's okay to be late in Mexico. It's not okay to be late in Bentonville.
Um, you have this great thing for folks who haven't heard, the learning moment. There's no mistakes. There have been no mistakes at WD-40. They're learning moments. Any particular learning moments that you might recount from your early days?
Oh, and I think we've touched on this, but the learning moment of being not afraid to say, I don't know. And I'll give you a beautiful example of this, and it plays into some of the wonderful work that you do. It was early on, I'd been in San Diego not too long at all. And I was then director of international operations. And I was in a meeting, and there was a group of leaders in this meeting. And someone came into us to present, and they started presenting. And they were doing what I finally labeled as they were confusing the conversation to make out how smart they were. They were just, they were camouflaging the issue with confusion to make out how smart they were. And I'm sitting there, and it's about 15 minutes in, and I'm thinking to myself, I have no clue what you're talking about. And I mean, is it because I'm this dumb Australian? Is there something going on here? Anyhow, in my frustrated way, I put up my hand. I said, I'm sorry, not long in this country, but I truly do not understand what you're trying to communicate to us here. And you know what, Molly? Everyone in the room went, oh,
Oh,
because no one else did either. And to me, there was a learning moment of, now, if I'd known you back then and listened to and been, coached by you, I probably would have said it skillfully instead of bluntly the way I did. But it was truly, don't be afraid to really, what do you say? Use your voice, know your voice.
mhm.
Because we could have wasted an hour there and everyone would have walked out and we all would have got into the lunchroom and said, what do you think that was about? Um, so, that was one of my major learning moments. But getting comfortable with the three most important words I've ever learned in my life, I don't know. When I was in my full role at WD-40, I used to introduce myself like this. G'day, I'm Garry Ridge. I'm the consciously incompetent, probably wrong, and roughly right chairman and CEO of WD-40 company, and I need all the help I can get.
How much do we love that? I mean, that ability to own that. I mean, I know it seems so natural to you, and how, like, because it's not easy to, because you spend your whole life trying to be right, being better than everyone else. That's how they pick you. As you came up through your career, did you just know that that was the way to be? I mean, I'm really serious because that's a very, advanced
No,
psychology.
no, I didn't know. I mean, in my early leadership career, I thought I needed to be bright and be gone, and that's how I went. But when I was given the opportunity to lead as CEO in 1997, I knew how to make our brand famous around the world. I knew the elements that marketing wise needed to be put in place. Simple questions were, does the end user consumer need us? If so, do they know us? And if they know us, can we make it easy for them to buy? I knew how to do that. What I didn't know was how to do it in multiple places from a distance. And I was, thinking, how am I going to do this? I can't do it on my own. We have to build a global infrastructure. And I was traveling from Los Angeles to Sydney on a Qantas 747. And I was 38,000 feet above the Pacific Ocean, somewhere in the middle of the night, with that light coming down, shining on some articles I was reading. And I read a quote from the Dalai Lama, and it said, our purpose in life is to make people happy. If we can't make them happy, at least don't hurt them. And I thought, well, interesting concept in business, isn't it? If we could make people happy. And then I read a quote, honestly, from Aristotle, who was born in 384 BC. And Aristotle's quote was, pleasure in the job puts perfection in the work. And I thought, duh, wow. And I still didn't know how to do it. So I got back to San Diego, and I'm reading the local newspaper, and there's an article about a master's degree in leadership at the University of San Diego. And it was a program put together by Dr. Ken Blanchard, the 1 Minute Manager, and USD. And they had an information night on it. And I thought, I need to go to that. So I went to the information night, and Ken Blanchard was speaking. He said, most MBA programs get people in the head. We've got to start getting also people in the heart, because that's what it's all about. And I went, I need to know more about this. So I enrolled, here I am, second year CEO of a US public company, and I enroll and get accepted in a master's degree at USD in leadership. So for the next 2 years, I went to school, and I had great professors. One of them was Ken Blanchard, who then became my very dear friend. I just went to his 85th birthday party just a week ago, and he's become a true mentor to me. And I took all of this learning around servant leadership, and I started to put it to work in the company. And if it worked, I turned up the volume. And if it didn't, I turned it down. And, that's why we got clear about what our purpose was, what our values were, how were we going to make decisions. I learned that there were probably 3 things that were very important to people. Do I belong? Do I matter? Can I make a choice? Do I have the ability to make choices? And we started to do that. And suddenly, over a period of time, it wasn't really suddenly, it took a while to gain momentum. People started to look at us and say, wow, I really enjoy what I'm doing. And anyhow, it goes on to the point where eventually we had employee engagement at 93% and 98% of our people globally saying they'd love to tell people they worked at the company. And we expanded into 176 countries. And it was all because of the culture that we built, not me, we. And I love that master's program so much. I ended up putting 30 plus people through that program over a 20-year period. So we had 30 people plus in the company with master's degrees in leadership, preaching and working around these principles. So it's a learning journey.
That is amazing. The leading people part versus the managing task part, both important, right? But the leading people part is what really drives. Before we get into some of the CEO days, I'm sure a lot of people are wondering, just the career progression. And many people are going from different companies every 18 months. And so to have someone with longevity. So I am curious, when you first got in, did you like, okay, I know I want to navigate. Did you have a plan, a grand plan, or did it kind of just happen? I'm curious how you thought about developing your career.
Get in the game, play your best game every game, and there's a chance you'll get picked on the A team, was my thinking. So I was asked to join WD-40 Company Australia in 1987 to start up the Australian subsidiary to build out the Asia Pacific region. Uh, I For the first 6 months, we stood up the company, and on January 1, 1988, we started. And from 88 to 94, I worked out of Sydney, but mainly in the Asia Pacific region. And in 94, I was having a conversation with the then CEO of the company. We were kind of having I don't know, we had a monthly phone update. I forget what it was now. And I said, is there anything else you'd like me to do? I could do some more work if you'd like me to do something. And he said, funny you should ask. Do you want to move to the US? I said, to do what? He said, why don't you come over here and help me build out the brand globally? He said, we have a vision to do that. And I don't have anybody in the organization that understands it the way you do. So come over and help me out. So if I was to reflect on that today, I'd reflect on the work of our good friend, Whitney Johnson, right? Disrupt yourself. But, well, why not? I mean, great brand.
Yeah.
Move to the US. Let's go. So moved to the US. My son was 12. My daughter was 10. I arrived in San Diego. That was quite a change. Everybody thinks that the Australian culture and the US cultures are similar. Well, they are similar, but there are so many differences. And until you immerse yourself in them, to the least is that you drive on the other side of the road, my God. Like, come on, how different can you be? And then for the next 3 years, I spent most of my time in Europe and Latin America, based out of San Diego, as we were building up, those operations. And then in 1997, he decided to retire, and the CEO. And for some reason, the board of directors of a US public company thought that this crazy Aussie bloke might be okay as CEO. Well, I think the reason is because I did understand our global opportunity, but I'd never been to Wall Street. I didn't understand the politics of a public company. I had to learn all that, which was probably an advantage. I didn't go in with the preset ideas. I remember sitting across the desk from investors in Wall Street where they were telling me how the most important thing was the quarterly results. And I'd say, I can't lead a company in 90-day intervals. We've got to build an enduring company over time. If you're looking for someone to deliver in 90-day intervals, go buy something else. I can't do that. We'll never be friends. And which was true. So it kind of progressed like that, but it really went back to get in the game, play your best game every game, and there's a chance you'll get picked on the A team, and be a curious learner along the way. I mean, we don't have the answers.
Amazing. So this Wall Street. So I think a lot of people hearing that, like, right, we're going to stand up and tell them how we're going to make the company. So that's pretty brave, because I think a lot of people would tend to fold, like, well, here I am in a public company. And was it even dawn on you that you were maybe the one in 1,000 who would say that to the Wall Street people?
Well, the reason I couldn't say it was it wasn't right. It wasn't going to be. Simon Sinek tells the story often. I was on a conference call. It was later in the time, and we were giving our quarterly results as you do. And one of the analysts said, well, you missed your quarter number. And I said, I didn't miss my quarter number. You made up the number. I didn't. It was your number, not my number, because we didn't give quarterly guidance. We only gave annual guidance. And so, I didn't miss it. It was your number. My number's fine. But again, you can't say that without a clearly defined plan, a roadmap to the future. We always had a yearly plan and a 5-year projection, and we were always very, very conscious of the fact that, you know, we needed to somewhat deliver around our promise, which means you had to have a great organization to be able to do that. So, you know, you can't be, you know, bold and brash and say, don't follow me unless, and not have a logical plan for people to be able to, you know, to say, yeah, this could make sense. And I'd often say, we're here to build an enduring company that we will be proud to pass on to others. That's why we're here.
Yeah. We're going to come back to the company culture. I have a question. When you're moving a 10-year-old and 12-year-old, your family, was that like, hey, I have an idea? You know, I mean, how did that, I mean, kind of presume there's family and there's friends, and it's a long ways away. So how did that transpire within the family?
It was different. You know, my mom, you know, I remember telling my mom, and she says, "You're going to take my grandchildren to where?" I said, "You can come visit, Mum. It'll be okay." My friends, you know, they said, "You'll be back in 5 years." Well, maybe I will be. I don't know. But it was kind of an adventure, you know. And on reflection, you know, I look at my son and daughter now, and it was a great move for them. My son is a very accomplished leader in the company he works for, and my daughter is a dance judge and teacher, world renowned. They wouldn't have got that experience back in Australia. So, you know, I think they see that as well.
Yeah. How do you identify? I'm curious, do you identify Australian, American? How do you personally identify?
I'm a person of the world. Actually, what I actually say is I live in the US, but Australia is my homeland. And it will always be my soil. You know, I'm an Aussie. Um,
Yeah.
but, you know, I'm a citizen of the world. And that's one of the things that early on in the company, I said, we're going to take out the word international out of our vocabulary. It's not domestic and international business. We're a global company that happens to be domiciled in the US. So we're going to talk about global business, not because immediately you put that wall up, domestic, international, you know, well, which side do you want to sit on? No. We're a global company. So,
I love that. Let me ask about, I know Ken, we love Ken Blanchard. He's been a huge force. Other mentors along the way who've been particularly game-changing for you?
yeah, Ken has been the biggest influence. Marshall, of course. Simon Sinek. I met Simon 18 years ago. We were on a panel together in Arizona. And here's how naive I am. I didn't know who he was, you know. And back then he wasn't Simon Sinek, the Simon Sinek, but he was the Simon Sinek, you know. And funnily enough, we're on a panel together and we started talking the same language. So we became friends, and you know, I've learned a lot from what he shares. But so, you know, I think, and then of course there are other people along the way, Molly, you and our friends. And there's, you know, I love just the opportunity to hear what others, you know, what other value others add to the world.
Yeah, no, your openness comes through, true and true. Just we could go for like 5 hours on the WD-40 culture, but could we just spend some time to help illuminate for people and what makes it so special? And I understand it's harder to get into than some of our top business goals on the planet. So, you know, and there's that maniac pledge, you know, just do a little bragging rights because I just want folks to know it really is possible to have this kind of culture that just coheres people to do their absolute best together.
Yeah, and you know the new book I'm writing, Any Dumbass Can Do It. And the reason the title is that is because if you know the ingredients that go into the petri dish of culture, and you're prepared to nurture the good ingredients and treat the toxins along the way, then you can be the person that helps build great cultures. And, you know, great culture is based on number one, it's a people first mindset. Do we really believe that our success is dependent on those we have the privilege to lead? And that's so true. You know, as I said, I needed all the help I could get. The next thing is, do we have a clearly defined purpose? You know, people get up every day to make a difference to something bigger than themselves. So our purpose at WD-40 was we're in the memories business. We woke up every day to create positive, lasting memories for the customers and end users that we serve, the communities and the environment that we had the privilege to operate in, and the people who came to work every day to do that. So that was so important. Do we have a set of values that set people free? And that's so important because people want to make choices. So in our organization, we had a set of values that were there to protect people and set them free. Then you have to have a clear strategy. Strategy is so important. And then you have to be bold at execution. And then you have to have psychological safety, which is take the word failure out and have learning moments. And that sits on 4 pillars of care, candor, accountability, and responsibility. Do we care about our people? Are we candid with our people? No lying, no faking, no hiding. Are we holding our people accountable? In other words, do we know what an A looks like? And are we dedicated as coaches, not managers, to help them get an A? And are we going to hold people responsible? And that's the Maniac Pledge, of where we say, I'm responsible for my actions. I'm responsible for knowing what I should know. I'm responsible for telling others if I should. And I have no right to be offended if I'm not told something or if I didn't get it sooner. I have to be responsible. And then you have to do it every day. You have to do it every day, every day, every day. And that's what's so important.
Yeah, there you go. The end. Bow, tie it, wrap, done.
Yeah.
Solve world hunger. Here we go. So it's not that simple. We know that. Garry, what have for you been the biggest challenges? And then in particular, sometimes we have team members and we love them up, as Ellen says, but they're not right for the journey. So maybe just talk about how you've, managed that so that, you keep that bar high with the right people, on the bus, if you will.
Well, I think the first thing comes down to is we as human beings disappoint people because we're not clear about what we expect from each other. And, in the book that Ken and I wrote, we said, we're not here to mark your paper. We're here to help you get an A. So are we clear what an A looks like? If an A walked in the door right now, what would it look like? And then what's my role in that? I'm not a manager. If you look up the word manager in some dictionaries, it says manipulator. I'm not here to manage you. You manage your bank account, you manage inventories. I'm here to be your coach. And what does a great coach do? It helps those they have the privilege of coaching win the game or be the best player on the team. So, if those things are in place, having those redirection conversations are a lot easier than having that conversation where you're disappointed in someone, you've got to redirect them. They didn't know they were walking on the wrong side of the street anyhow, and you end up in that place you don't want to go to. Because people deserve to be happy in what they do. And if they're not happy, help them be happy somewhere else. So, yeah, I think over time, a good friend of mine, and Ron Carusi, right? He wrote the great book, To Be Honest. And he has a great, I had a great learning from him when he said, most people protect their own comfort zone at the expense of other people's development. And what that really means is we protect our own comfort zone because we don't want to have that conversation because we haven't set up the foundation to have the conversation that's not going to be a confrontation.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, it's simple, folks. It really is simple. I get that it cannot be easy, but if you stick to the basics, it really is all there. Garry, you've been such a trooper because you shared my videos with I don't know how many folks. So how about some advice to folks who perhaps don't speak up as much as they think they should or have trouble? I mean, I'm just curious how you've coached up folks who there's more there, or perhaps folks, maybe they share too much and not in a way that lands for others.
Yeah, again, is it about you and your ego, or is it about the empathy for the conversation you're having? And what you do so well really locks in with what Ron talks about is how do you say it skillfully? And how do you take out this threat of, redirection in a negative way to redirecting in a positive way? And again, don't have a personal agenda. Is it for the good of all, really, is what it's about. Mm-hmm. So I think words can be so powerful, and they can be so hurtful, and they can be so loving, and they can destroy people. So it's important for us to think about, how do we communicate? How do we get that message across?
Yeah, yeah, it is. And it's a skill to hone through our whole lives because we're going into new situations, new relationships, moving up in our careers. And, you've just been a poster child of finding the words and putting it out there. But really, with the biggest of heart, and when you have positive intent, folks, maybe the words aren't perfect, but if people can feel that you're coming from a good place, it tends to go well, even if it isn't news they want to hear, even if it is
Absolutely.
want to hear. So let's talk a little bit about refirement. And then the book, it was just like, I have to write this book, or someone gave you the idea. And then the title is like insane. It's so great.
Yeah. Well, it goes back, the refinement part goes back to our dear friend Marshall Goldsmith. It would have been probably 10 years ago now. I was in New York with Marshall, and Marshall, as he says, he gets in your face sometimes. Well, let me give you some advice. Let me give you some coaching, not advice. And there's only two words you have to say to Marshall when he gives you coaching. Thank you. That's all he wants to know. And he said to me, so what's next for you? I said, what are you talking about? He said, well, you've now been CEO of a public company for fill in the blank. I don't know how many years it is. And two pieces of advice I'm going to give you. Number one, get out on top. Don't stay longer than you need to. Make sure you develop your leadership team underneath you and that, you're ready to move on to the next thing. And then he said, and don't float into a void. I said, what do you mean, Marshall? He said, you need to make sure that your purpose is clear. He said, I've seen so many leaders of huge organizations who, after being in this role for so long, they wake up the next day and it's like, oh, my life is gone. My purpose has disappeared. What am I here for? And it was true. It was true. So I started working back then on, as he said, and you owe the world a debt. You've learned all this. Pay it forward.
Mm.
Do what you need to do. So I started thinking about that back then, which would have been 8 years before I refired. And I thought, yeah, I do want to do what I'm passionate about, and that's helping people build organizations where people go home happy. Because happy people create happy families create happy communities create a happy world, and by golly, we need a happy world. So that's what I started working on, and now I'm coaching. I coach 6 CEOs at the moment. I'm on a couple of boards, which I love being on because it keeps me in touch with what I do love. I speak, as you know, on the subject, and help other leaders, learn from my scar tissue. So that's what I do now. And the book, um, you know, I don't know that it was a true ambition, but it sort of came together in that, where do I put all this learning in one place? And that's how it came about. And I was very fortunate to be working with a brilliant writing partner, Martha Finney. I'd been working with her for a couple of years on articles I was doing. I can't write to save my own life, but I never, spelling was never my A grade in school. But Martha, as I said, she takes my threads of thought and weaves them into tapestries of glorious learning. So, we worked together for a year or so, and now we have Any Dumbass Can Do It, which is 26 chapters of my journey as a CEO of $1 billion company. So
That's amazing. I love the tapestry comment. In the process of writing the book, Garry, what did you learn about yourself?
um, I learned that I really do appreciate, now that I step back and think about it even more, the privilege I had to work with so many amazing people along the way, and what a true gift that was. So sometimes, being the CEO of a public company is a very lonely place, and sometimes in the hustle and bustle of that, you really, you know, get to a point where you don't appreciate those around you as much as you should. And I think being out of that, when I woke up on September 1, whatever year it was, when I wasn't CEO anymore, I went, wow, this is different. But because I had a purpose going forward, I was able to say, now I'm on to my next step. Now I'm on to my next thing.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a journey. It's, I love when it's something where it just came out of, like you never imagined it would be this way. And for you, I think it really helps with the just genuine gratitude for all that you've earned and then has, come upon for you. And it just shows,
Hmm.
there's a certain lightness, that comes through, and it's really marvelous. Okay, you've been very generous. We could go on and on. I'm going to take us for a wrap. So, is there, Garry, one do-over in life? You're exactly where you are, you're fired, everything's great, but is there a particular do-over you might share with us?
Um, I don't know if it's a do-over but I think it would be, there were circumstances where I knew what I should have done and I should have done it quicker. And it was really always around people,
Mm,
where I should have been brave enough to have that conversation earlier. I should have met Molly earlier so I could have said it more skillfully. But I think that's probably one of the areas. And we're dealing with the most complex thing in the world, people. So it probably would have been, you know, I love I love a quote from Shakespeare: "If it needs to be done, best be done quick." And that doesn't say do things quick. It says if it needs to be done. So, take your time to really get clarity around if it needs to be done.
yeah.
And once you've decided it needs to be done, it best be done quick.
Yeah, those are wise words. So many accomplishments. Is there a particular proudest accomplishment you'd call out, Garry?
Oh, yeah. Um, that 98% of people at WD-40 globally said they love to tell people they worked at the company. That would be something I couldn't be more proud. I don't care what the financial result, well, I did, but for people to say that. And the other one that I love is 97% of them said they respect their coach, which is their boss. And
Mm.
most people leave organizations because they hate their boss. But we 98% of our people went home happy, and that means their families were a little bit happier. Hopefully their impact on community was a little bit better. And hopefully that then made a little bit of positive difference on the world.
Yeah, more than a little bit of a positive. For sure. Okay, three rapid fire questions. You're in a whole new life. If you were to pick a profession, not in leadership, what profession might you do?
I'll be a radio announcer, disc jockey.
Just jockey. I can see you spinning. Any nicknames you can share with us that you had along the way?
Uh, well, in Australia, we always, abbreviated. So it was always Gaza,
As a Casa.
Gaza.
I
Yeah.
love that. I love that. Okay, and a favorite food or cuisine?
Oh my God. Well, it'd either be Italian or Indian.
Okay, okay. And you shared a lot, and I hope it was a chance for you to reflect on your journey, even though I know you have done it.
Yeah.
You have a top takeaway and listening to yourself, Garry?
Um, yeah, life's a gift. Don't send it back unwrapped. And one of my favorite quotes is from Nelson Mandela, which is, "It always seems impossible until it's done." And if you look at my email at the bottom of it, it says we all have something significant yet to do.
Yeah. Your belief in people is just off the charts. And Garry, you have shown us in Say It Skillfully fashion how finding your authentic voice and learning how and when to best use it really is life changing and not only benefiting your career, but everything, single thing you do, all the people that you touch. I could not appreciate you anymore for how you're part of the solution, right? You've shared generously your journey in life, your many learning moments, my friend. And I want to thank you for helping us all to be safe and seen and heard and our true and very, very best selves. Always cheering for you. And if there's any little thing I can do to help you, I'm here for you.
Thank you, Molly. It's been a pleasure, and I'm delighted that I could be with you today.
Yeah, what a treat. Yes, I'm going to say in my closing thought, I have to echo Gary with Nelson Mandela. It's always impossible till it's done. And that is a wrap, folks. Thanks for joining us. Please be part of the solution and kindly share this show. Amplify Gary's voice, the mighty Gaza. Reflect on your own top takeaways and know that I'm cheering for you to be who you are and skillfully say what needs to be said so that you and those around you have the shared reality that makes work and life much, much better. Take care.